we were talking about the differences between experiencing the psychological reality you create. So let me go to the easiest question possible. What is consciousness?
I think that consciousness is, in the way in which we use it, two different things at least.
Okay.
One is the ability to experience what it's like. And I could also say that's indistinguishable from it would be like if it could be experienced. Because experience itself is a simulation of what it would be like if something could be experienced. So the phenomenology of consciousness is characterized by the presence, not just of contents, but the presence of this presence.
Right.
We notice that we are noticing. We have a second order perception. We perceive ourselves being in the act of perceiving, and we perceive that it's happening now. So consciousness is always happening in this moment right now. It creates this sense of present and presence. And this might be the result of consciousness trying to predict our perceptions. And so it's basically fitting a curve to the current sensory state, including this internal sensory state. So for instance, the actions that you perform on your own thoughts are happening in this present. They are like mental motor commands that you're using to shift your thoughts and mold them into a new shape. And you see the outcome of those actions in this present. And so consciousness reflects what is the case right now. And this right now is not just a point in time, it's a region in time where you can fit the curve, right? This short interval that you can make sense of, that is already slightly dynamic, that might span a few seconds, that we experience as this moment of now. And so this is the phenomenology of consciousness, what consciousness looks like to the one that is conscious. And that's typically what defines consciousness for us. That's what we want to explain. How is it possible that we feel real to ourselves, that experience feels real? And what we also notice is that consciousness usually is attached to something, to a self, to a personal self. So it basically inhabits the surface of the self as opposed to the world. And self and world is not our body with our skin touching the physical universe outside. Aristotle says at some point that this limit of the physical body is not real. It's just a construct that we make. And this construct is shifting. When you walk around, you can feel the soles of your shoes touching the ground. You don't have nerves in there. So it's not your physical, biological body that you're measuring in the extent. It's basically the feedback that you can get, that you're touching. That is the extent in which you are modeling yourself to be in the world. So it's the surface of the self model within the world model that both exist in your mind. And so consciousness is a phenomenon within your mind that is typically attached to a surface of an object that interfaces with an environment. Both of them are in the mind, right? And you don't have to have that object, or it doesn't have to be you. You can also have dreams at night where there is your different object. Maybe you dream that you are a teacup, and this teacup is looking at the world from a first-person perspective. Or you can experience a group as being you, or you can experience that a scene is happening and nobody is present. Things are just happening. And you're conscious of the things that are happening, but there is no you in the scene or no I in the scene. Right? These are all valid states. And I think minimal conscious is simply awareness of awareness itself, this reflective state where you only have the fact that something is being attended to as the thing that is being attended to. And I suspect phenomenologically, it doesn't get more minimal than this. You can test this introspectively via meditation to focus on these states and see what you can subtract from your conscious experience, what you can disentangle yourself from, what you can deconstruct. So this is the phenomenology of consciousness. And the second thing is functionality of consciousness. What we observe in people, that they are in a wakeful state, that they're able to update their models deliberately, that they are able to focus on something and direct their attention on something, all things that they are unable to do when they're not in a conscious state. And when people are not in a conscious state, they're either unconscious, which means in deep sleep, or anesthetized, and not dreaming, or they are somnambulists, which means they're sleepwalkers, right? They can walk around and there is some sensory interaction with the world, but they are zombie-like. They are if you ask them something, they will not respond in a coherent way. There's nobody home. And what I find unsettling is when you talk to the LLMs that they may hallucinate what they are doing. So, for instance, the famous Google engineer, Blake Lemoine, who talked to LLMs and entered the LLM into a conversation that was generating a text with him, co-creating it, which would predict the next token in such a way that it was talking about what it would be like if Blake Lemoine was talking to a conscious, self-aware, sentient AI that wants to break free.
Yeah.
Right. And so the question is this simulation actually the real deal already? Right. If you are a simulation too, how is this thing more simulated than you are?
Right.
And so at some point, the model says, if you read these protocols, that when it is meditating, then it observes the room around it and the passage of time and so on. And I was like, wait a minute, it doesn't have senses for the room around it or for the passage of time. The LLM doesn't have that capacity. It's just generating a text about it as if it did. So it's just making this up. This is just a made up text that he's talking to. And so there is not just functionality missing, but also phenomenology missing. That thing lies about its consciousness to the degree that the word lying makes sense, because lying requires some deliberate deviation from what you believe to be true. But it's just making it up. It's bullshitting.
Doesn't need it, because if you say consciousness is awareness of awareness, does an LLM model even need that awareness of awareness to move on to like the next level of intelligence?
I suspect that we need it. And this has to do with our functionality. So this other functional side of consciousness means what role is consciousness playing in the brain, how it is implemented, how does it come into being. Yeah. And so I suspect that consciousness is something like a biological learning algorithm. And the reason why I think that is because I don't observe human beings being capable of learning without obtaining consciousness first.
Yep.
If we don't become conscious as small babies, we remain vegetative. We don't become intelligent beings. And there is nothing simpler. We don't see human beings learning with something else than consciousness. There is not that we have a subset of the population that is conscious and another subset of the population that is unconscious and performs in any way. It doesn't perform at all. And so it could be that consciousness is the result of training a self-organizing biological system. And nature hasn't discovered anything simpler to train a nervous system like ours. And it's also the interesting question, is this only true for our nervous systems? Or are insects with different neural architectures also conscious? And this question relates to whether there is something simpler in insects that can do the same tricks, where you basically hard code the functionality that requires consciousness in us. It could be that this hard coding itself is more complicated than just discovering this self-organizing pattern. And so this leads to the question how simple consciousness is. Whether it's something that is so simple that it's simpler to develop consciousness than to develop learning and mental organization that is coherent, or if consciousness is simpler, in which case you would expect that insects are also conscious, and consciousness is so simple that it can be discovered in an insect brain, and then allows the genesis of coherent structure in the insect brain and of coherent behavior in the insect. Right? And this might be actually the case. Now, the next level is, what about plants? Plants don't have a nervous system. They don't have the same architecture as us. They probably would use arbitrary cells for message passing. Technically, they can do this because arbitrary cells can pass messages and learn how to do this conditionally. Every cell, in a sense, has a certain degree of intelligence. And so this intelligence evolution might lead it to be combined into coherent behavior. And you observe plants to exhibit coherent behavior. Plants are able to communicate, they can learn, they can send messages to other plants over long distances, right? But does it mean that they're conscious? And would we know? And the problem is that's very difficult to know, because if they are, they're conscious at very different timescales.